She gave her daughter everything, her love, her pension, her trust. But in return, she was made to sleep on the floor like she didn't matter. Everyone thought she was too old to fight back, but silently, she proved them all wrong. When retirement came, it wasn't with a grand celebration or a golden watch, but with a bittersweet sigh and a cardboard box filled with memories from 35 years of service as a school teacher. At 67, she had expected her final walkout of the gates to feel like freedom, a release into peace after years of discipline, chalk dust, exams, and early morning routines. Instead, it felt like walking into the unknown. The one thing that reassured her was her daughter, Amina. Amina had insisted she move in. "You've done so much for me, Ami," she had said over the phone weeks earlier, her voice sweet with emotion. "It's our turn now. Come stay with us. We'll take care of everything. No more bills, no more cooking, just rest." The mother, who had sacrificed everything after her husband's untimely death, felt her heart soften. Her daughter's words felt like sunlight warming her back. She hadn't heard such tenderness in years. She packed her modest belongings, mostly, some books, her husband's prayer cap, and an old diary. The pension was transferred to her account, a lifetime of work summed up in a figure that seemed large on paper but small when measured against the years of sacrifice. She added Amina as a secondary signatory, just in case something happened. It felt like the responsible thing to do. When she arrived at her daughter's house, she was greeted with hugs and a freshly cooked meal. Her 2 grandchildren, teenage and tangled in their phones, barely looked up, but that didn't bother her. Amina's husband, Rashid, was courteous but distant. Still, her daughter welcomed her with warm tea and a clean room. It felt like a fresh chapter. For a while, everything seemed fine. The first signs were so subtle, they were almost invisible. The hot tea she loved was now lukewarm. Meals started becoming late or replaced with leftovers. "Sorry, Ami, too tired today," Amina would say, her eyes glued to her phone. Then came the dismissals, quiet ones. Conversations that ended abruptly. Family outings she was not invited to. It stung, but she ignored it. Mothers forgive without needing apologies. 2 weeks later, Amina asked for the pension card. "Let me manage the bills. It's easier," she said casually. "You don't need to worry about these things." She hesitated but handed it over. The trust of a mother is like a blindfold made of silk, beautiful, delicate, and blinding. The money disappeared faster than she expected, but whenever she asked, Amina would wave her off. "Groceries are so expensive now," she'd say. "Stop worrying, just enjoy." One night, she got up to drink water and overheard her daughter whispering on the phone. Yes, I got it all. Pension, everything. No, she won't ask questions. She's old." That single sentence stabbed harder than any betrayal she had ever known. She stood frozen behind the wall, her hand trembling against the wooden frame, her throat dry. She returned to bed, but sleep didn't come, only silence, a deafening kind. The days grew quieter after that. Her presence became like wallpaper there, but forgotten. No one asked her anything anymore. No one looked her in the eyes. Her room turned into a storage space, gradually cluttered with boxes and old clothes. Her meals were cold, served without a word. Her chai was now made with leftover milk, and sometimes not at all. The grandchildren laughed loudly, their music too harsh for her aging ears, but she said nothing. She didn't want to be a burden. That word burden hung in the air like a ghost. One afternoon, she found the living room sofa occupied with laundry and the guest room locked for Amina's friend visiting from Dubai. "You can sleep in the lounge," Amina said flatly, "just for a few nights." She tried to smile, nodding obediently, but inside her chest, something cracked. When she lay on the floor that night, wrapped in her thin shawl, the tiles beneath her aching bones felt colder than any winter she had ever known. She missed her husband that night, his voice, his warmth, the way he called her Jan, even after years of marriage. She clutched his prayer cap in the dark, holding it close to her chest, whispering into the fabric as if he could hear her. She didn't cry, not out loud, but the tears came anyway, slow, tired, quiet. Amina grew bolder in her rudeness. "Why don't you just go back to your old house?" she said one morning, annoyed that the mother had left dishes unwashed. "You had your own place." "No. Why did you even retire if you couldn't handle your life?" The words felt like poison, sharp and cruel. The mother looked at her daughter and didn't recognize her anymore. This wasn't the little girl she had fed from her hands, carried on her back, or stayed awake for during fevers. This was someone else, someone colder. She thought about going back to her old flat, the one she had rented for years, but it was sold to clear debts. Everything she had was here in this house that no longer felt like home. In this family where she was now just an unwanted object. A few weeks later, she asked gently, "Can I go visit the bank myself this month? I'd like to see the statement." Amina's eyes turned steel. "What for? Don't you trust me? Do you think I'm stealing from you?" Her voice rose. Rashid entered the room, eyeing the mother with discomfort. "It's okay," she replied quickly, her hands trembling. "I was just asking. No need to go." That night, her dinner was missing. When she asked, Amina replied, "You didn't cook, did you? Why should you eat first?" And just like that, she was told to sleep on the floor again, this time without a pillow. The excuse was that the maid needed the bed the next morning. Her dignity, piece by piece, was being peeled off. Her heart ached in a way that no medicine could heal. It wasn't the body that was broken, it was trust. It was love. She thought of her friends who stayed with their sons or daughters and were treated like royalty. And then she looked at her thin mattress on the cold floor, the windows slightly open, letting in the night breeze. Even the breeze felt gentler than her own child, but somewhere in her, a tiny flicker remained, a quiet strength. She wasn't ready to break. Not yet. She lay still on the floor, watching the ceiling. The fan spun slowly, like the years she had sacrificed rotating, but never moving forward. She closed her eyes and whispered, not to her daughter, not to the silence, but to herself. "They may have taken my bed, my money, and my name, but they haven't taken my will." The silence around her was thick, but inside her mind, something had begun to stew, a plan, an awakening, the first spark of revenge, not fueled by hate, but by dignity. The next morning, she would wake not as a mother, hoping for kindness, but as a woman who was ready to fight for what was hers, even if that meant starting from nothing. Even if that meant doing it alone. The morning after sleeping on the cold floor felt different, not just physically, but emotionally. Her body ached from the hard tiles beneath her frail frame. But more than that, her heart carried a bruise far deeper than any bone. She moved, slowly, gathering her shawl around her shoulders, careful not to make noise, as though she was an unwanted guest in a stranger's house. In the kitchen. She found only leftover stale bread and cold tea. No one greeted her, not even a glance from Amina, who was already dressed for work, sipping from a fresh cup of coffee. Her son-in-law Rashid sat across the table, scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging her existence. The children didn't even look up. She sat silently in the corner and began eating without complaint. Her place in the house had become invisible, like an old curtain, tattered, faded, and unnoticed. The days began to blur together. There were no conversations, only commands. No warmth, only indifference. She was expected to stay out of the way, not speak unless spoken to, and never ask questions. The pension money was gone as soon as it came in. When she inquired gently about her medical bills or the little she wanted to send to a distant cousin, Amina would respond with irritation, telling her how expensive everything was and how she was lucky to be fed and sheltered. One evening, while cleaning the old cupboard in her room, she found a small tin box hidden under her clothes. Inside were old photographs, herself in her youth, her husband in his wedding, Shawani, and a young Amina in her school uniform with a wide smile. She ran her fingers over the pictures as though they could bring those days back. A tear slid down her cheek, not just from nostalgia, but from pain. This girl, this smiling child, was now the same woman who looked through her like she didn't exist. Later that night, Amina returned from work and found the television volume too low for her liking. She snapped at her mother. "What's the point of having you in the house if you can't even keep the TV working properly? Do you know how tiring my day was?" The mother remained quiet. The silence was her only shield now. Words had no meaning anymore. Not here. That weekend, a small family gathering was held at their house. Distant relatives and neighbors were invited. Amina made sure the house was spotless, the food catered, and everyone dressed perfectly. But her mother was kept in her room. "You're not feeling well, right? Better to rest," Amina said with a false sweetness, her eyes making it clear it wasn't a suggestion. The mother sat on her bed, listening to laughter, music, and stories echoing from the living room. Number 1 came to check on her. She felt like a ghost haunting her own life. The next morning, when she tried to talk to Amina, to ask why she was being treated this way, Her daughter exploded. Why do you always create drama? You've become so sensitive in old age. Just stay in your room and stop interfering. This is my house now. That sentence cut through her chest like a knife. My house now. As if she was a trespasser. As if everything she had done, sacrificed, given meant nothing. Asterisk, a few days later, a neighbor stopped by to drop off some books. She had once been her student. Miss, you've become so weak. Are you okay? The girl asked with genuine concern. But before she could answer, Amina came out and quickly shut the door. We don't need anything. Thank you, she said sharply, shooting her mother a look of warning. That evening, Amina lectured her for spreading misery and talking behind her back. Asterisk, it was becoming clear that her daughter was afraid of people knowing the truth that the pension was no longer being used for her, the truth that she was no longer cared for, but merely tolerated. A burden, that word again. Asterisk, she began keeping a small notebook hidden in her pillow. In it, she wrote, everything, dates, conversations, bank transactions. She managed to glimpse how much was withdrawn and when. She didn't know what she was going to do with it, but writing it gave her a sense of power, a record, a voice. Asterisk, then came winter. The nights became harsher. The windows leaked in cold drafts, and the blanket she had was too thin. She asked Amina for a new one. The reply was cruel and dismissive. Use your shawl. We can't afford luxuries for everyone. Luxuries? A warm blanket. For a woman who had spent her youth waking up at dawn to cook breakfast, working all day, returning to cook again, and tutoring her daughter late into the night. That was now a luxury. Asterisk, one particularly cold night, the electricity went out. The family lit candles in their rooms, but none were given to her. She sat in the dark, her knees pulled close to her chest, whispering prayers to herself. When a candle finally made its way to her, it was already half burned, left over from the children's birthday months ago. Asterisk, on a Sunday afternoon, she overheard her grandson speaking to a friend on the phone. Yeah, she just lives here now, doesn't do much. I don't even think she has money left. Mom said she's not going anywhere. Old people just hang around till they fade. The words weren't meant to hurt her, but they reached her ears like hammers. She had become background noise in her own family. Asterisk, but she wasn't fading. Not yet. She began noticing details. Amina had started looking at property papers. There were phone calls about a renovation loan. She caught Rashid whispering in the hallway about changing the ownership. The house had been partly under her name. She remembered that clearly. She had helped buy it when her husband was alive, contributing her earnings. Now, it was being discussed without her. She wasn't just being erased from daily life, she was being erased from history. Asterisk. Her notebook entries became longer. She noted everything. Her hands trembled. Her eyesight blurred sometimes, but she kept writing. She began hiding copies in different places in her diary, inside old pillow covers, even under a loose tile in the bathroom. She didn't know who would believe her or where she would go, but if something were to happen, someone needed to know the truth. Asterisk, one night, Amina asked her to sign a paper. Just a bank form, she said casually. The mother asked to read it, and Amina snapped, "Don't you trust me?" But this time, the mother refused, quietly, but firmly. "Let me read it first." Amina's face tightened. "You're making this harder than it has to be," she hissed, then snatched the paper back and stormed off. Asterisk, the tension in the house grew. The silence between them was no longer soft. It was loud, sharp, and dangerous. Her meals became fewer. Her tasks increased. She was asked to fold laundry, clean dishes, take care of the house when everyone was out. One day, she collapsed from exhaustion. No one took her to a doctor. They gave her painkillers and left her to rest on the same floor where she had once been thrown. Asterisk, as she lay there, unable to move much, her eyes drifted toward the window. A pigeon sat on the ledge, shivering but unmoving, its tiny chest rising and falling with effort. It didn't fly away. It waited. Maybe it was waiting for warmth, maybe for morning. She watched it closely and whispered, "Me too." Asterisk, that night, she made a decision. She was going to leave. She didn't know when or how, but she would. Not because she hated her daughter. No, the wound was far deeper than hate. She would leave because she still loved herself. Somewhere beneath the broken ribs of her pride, something still breathed. Not hope, but defiance. Not rage, but purpose. Asterisk, and when she left, she would take with her not just the truth, but the strength to reclaim her name, her dignity, and her story. The third month of living in her daughter's home had carved deep emotional scars, once not visible to the eye but heavy enough to weigh down the spirit. It was during this period that sleeping on the floor no longer remained an occasional cruelty. It became a nightly ritual. There was no explanation, no argument, no accident that forced the change. Just one evening, Amina walked into the mother's small room, stripped the bedding from the single cot, and told her that a cousin was coming to stay for a week. "You can sleep in the lounge, just for a while," she said with feigned softness that barely concealed irritation. The mother didn't protest. She nodded silently and folded her things neatly. She took her pillow, thin blanket, and prayer mat, and placed them in the corner of the lounge where the cold marble floor met the old rug. She didn't expect comfort anymore. That expectation had long been stripped from her heart. That first night, the floor felt like punishment. Her bones pressed against the hardness, and her muscles refused to relax. She shifted from side to side, every move amplifying her pain. Her joints screamed, her back ached, and yet she made no sound. Her pride wouldn't allow it. The house was dark and quiet, save for the faint sound of laughter from behind the closed door of Amina's room. She clutched the edge of her shawl and stared at the ceiling, her eyes dry but her soul drenched in sorrow. Days turned into weeks. The cousin's visit never ended, or perhaps there never was a cousin to begin with. The cot was never returned, and the mother's new bedroom remained at the corner of the lounge. It was humiliating, but she bore it with a quiet strength that no one noticed, or perhaps no one cared to. Her life had become a repetition of submission. Wake up early, cook breakfast no one thanked her for, clean a house she no longer had a right to call home, and then vanish into the corners when the rest of the family came alive. There were times, in the dead of night, when she would wake up disoriented, forgetting where she was. Her heart would leap, expecting her old bedroom, her husband's snore beside her, or the faint hum of the ceiling fan from their little flat. But as she opened her eyes, she would see the harsh white ceiling, the dim light of a street lamp casting long shadows across the room, and silence, unfamiliar, suffocating silence. The grandchildren had grown colder too. They no longer said salam in the morning. One of them, when tripping over her blanket on the way to the kitchen, grumbled, "Why is she always lying here? It's not a hospital." She heard it, every word, and though her lips stayed still, her heart wept in a language no one could hear. Rashid, her son-in-law, had stopped even pretending. He would throw glances of disdain whenever she crossed his path. Once, when she sat too long at the dining table, he said loudly enough for her to hear, "This place is getting cramped." The words, though casually spoken, felt like being pushed out inch by inch. But she didn't leave, not yet. Part of her still held on to the hope that Amina might remember, that maybe, just maybe, her daughter would look at her one morning and recall all the times she had held her through sickness, comforted her during heartbreaks, sacrificed her own meals so Amina could eat. But the memory never returned. It was during these weeks that her health began to visibly decline. She lost weight, though there wasn't much to lose. Her skin grew pale, her eyes dull, her knees swelled from the cold tiles, her hands began to tremble more than usual. Yet, she was never taken to the doctor. "We can't afford extra expenses," Amina said bluntly one morning when the mother asked for a visit. "Besides, you just need rest and warm food, which you're already getting." The irony stung. That night, as she lay on the floor trying to ease the stiffness in her legs, she thought of the pension again. It had become a taboo topic. Any time she tried to ask, Amina would respond with fury, sometimes throwing the remote, sometimes slamming the door. "Are you accusing me of stealing?" she had once shouted. After that, the mother never brought it up again, but she watched. She listened. There were new curtains in the rooms. Amina had a new phone. Rashid bought branded shoes. The children were enrolled in new tuition academies. Where was the money coming from? She hadn't seen a single rupee from her pension in over 2 months. One morning, while everyone was out and she was cleaning the drawers as ordered, she found a bundle of receipts and bank slips stuffed into an old purse. Her name was on them, her account number visible, but the signatures were unfamiliar, clumsy attempts to imitate hers. Withdrawal after withdrawal. She felt her fingers grow numb. Her pension was not just being withheld, was being stolen. Her first instinct was not anger, it was heartbreak, that her own daughter could do this. that the child she had built a life around had reduced her to a signature. But this time, she didn't just cry. She didn't tear the papers or confront anyone. Instead, she tucked the documents into her old diary and returned to her chores as if nothing happened. That evening, when she was told again to sleep early and keep the lights off, she nodded, but instead of lying down, she waited. When everyone was asleep, she quietly crept to the lounge, opened the window just a little, and stared outside into the night. The world was vast, silent, unknowable. Somewhere out there, she believed, there must be a corner that didn't treat her like dust. The next morning, she rose early and made tea for the house. As she handed Amina a cup, she smiled genuinely, almost tenderly. Amina looked confused, but accepted it. "Thank you," she muttered. It was the first kind word in weeks. The mother simply nodded and went back to the kitchen. But behind that soft smile, something had changed. Her patience had not run out, but it had evolved. It was no longer the patience of helplessness, it was the patience of planning. She didn't know exactly what she would do yet, but she knew she couldn't let this continue. She began talking more to neighbors when she got the chance. To the grocery delivery boy, to the old lady she used to greet from the balcony. Slowly, she started asking subtle questions about legal help, about women's shelters, about pensions and property rights. She learned more in 2 weeks than she had in a year. One day, a letter arrived for her old colleague inviting her to a small school reunion. She wasn't sure if she would go, but she kept the letter safe. It reminded her that there was still a world outside this house that remembered her for who she truly was. Not a burden, not a background shadow, but a woman who had lived, worked, and mattered. That night, back on the cold floor, she didn't feel as weak. The aches were still there. Her body still trembled, but her heart had gained weight, not from sadness, but from resolve. She looked up at the ceiling and whispered softly, "You can't break me, not like this." And then, for the first time in months, she slept not like a guest, unwelcome, but like a warrior, resting before the storm. The days that followed felt slower, but not because they were uneventful. In fact, they were anything but. Her world had narrowed to that corner of the lounge, to the stretch of floor she now knew better than any bed she had ever slept on. But, while her body endured the ache and the silence, her mind was awakening. What once felt like defeat was now transforming into a quiet fire, small, contained, but hot enough to burn. She began noticing things she hadn't before. The shift in tones, the coded glances between her daughter and son-in-law, the way conversations would pause when she entered a room. They had grown so comfortable assuming she was weak, deaf, or unaware, but she wasn't any of those things. She had simply been quiet. Not because she lacked the strength to speak, but because she had been waiting for the right moment to listen, and now she was listening very carefully. One afternoon, while alone in the house, she found a set of papers in a plastic envelope tucked into the back of a kitchen drawer, papers that hadn't been there a week earlier. The envelope bore her full name in bold. She sat at the small wooden table and opened it, slowly, as if unraveling the truth in layers. It was a property transfer document. Her house. The name on the beneficiary line was not hers anymore. It was Amina's. Her fingers trembled as she read the lines again and again, her eyes scanning for mistakes, but there were none. Her signature had been forged with almost mechanical accuracy, yet her instinct knew it wasn't hers. She would never sign her life away. Her husband's hard-earned property, the place they built together, brick by brick, memory by memory, was gone. The betrayal was sharp and it clawed into her spine like 1,000 needles. She felt herself shake, not from fear, but from fury. She placed the papers back exactly where she had found them, her face calm, movements steady. If she exploded now, it would mean nothing. It would give them the drama they would use against her. Instead, she would wait. But the final nail had been hammered into a coffin she had not yet climbed into. They were not just stealing her money. They were stealing her identity, her past, her future. That evening, she sat quietly during dinner. Amina talked about upcoming renovations. Rashid discussed the loan officer and the need to update the interiors before selling the place. The children scrolled through their phones. No one asked her how her day was. No one noticed the stillness in her hands or the absence of emotion on her face. When Amina laughed and casually mentioned changing the house locks soon. Something in the mother's chest clenched. The message wasn't just about security, it was a threat, a warning. Her time in the house was running out. That night, she lay awake on the floor, but her mind was wide awake. She went over every conversation she had overheard, every clue she had written down in her notebook. Each word was another stone in the wall. She was building one that would shield her from what was coming. She no longer saw Amina as her daughter. That image had already died. What stood before her now was a stranger wearing her daughter's face, one who had weaponized motherhood and manipulated memory. In the following days, she moved like a shadow, quiet, unbothered, present in body but not in emotion. She obeyed their commands, served their tea, and responded politely. But behind that facade, she was working. She began calling her old friend Parveen from the community center during short walks to the corner shop. She told her everything, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Parveen listened quietly and then told her about a women's advocacy group in the city that helped abandoned or exploited senior citizens. They handled legal aid, temporary housing, and pension recovery. The mother listened, took notes, and made plans. When Parveen offered to speak to someone on her behalf, she refused gently. "No," she said, "I need to do this myself. They took everything from me, but I won't let them take my voice to *. One day, Amina returned home flustered. "There's a letter from the pension department," she said suspiciously, waving the envelope in her hand. "Did you contact someone?" The mother looked her dead in the eye. "No, why would I?" The lie slid easily from her tongue. Soft and steady, Amina narrowed her eyes and tossed the letter onto the kitchen counter. "Better not be any drama," she muttered. But there was going to be drama. Just not the kind Amina expected. That night, the mother stayed awake until everyone had gone to bed. She tiptoed into the small hallway, took her old leather purse from the cupboard, and placed inside it her notebook, the fake bank statements, the forged property documents she had secretly photocopied, and a picture of her husband. She zipped it shut and placed it beside her pillow like a shield. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual. She prepared breakfast for the family and served it like always. But today, she was dressed differently: an old brown sweater, a pressed cotton shalwar kameez, and her hair neatly tied. There was something regal in the way she moved, like a queen hiding beneath layers of dust. Amina noticed and frowned. "Where are you going?" The mother smiled. "To visit the pension office. I want to ask about something." Amina stood, eyes narrowed. "You don't need to. I already handle everything." The mother paused, then gently placed a paratha on her daughter's plate. "I just want to thank them for all the years they took care of my salary." "It won't take long." Amina didn't argue. Perhaps she thought the old woman was still weak, harmless, but she wasn't, not anymore. As soon as she stepped out of the house, her posture changed. She straightened her back, clutched her purse tighter, and walked not like someone who had been beaten down by betrayal but like someone who had survived it. At the pension office, she explained her situation. She showed them her ID, explained the forged withdrawals, and asked about the legal implications of unauthorized signatures. The officers were kind, surprised by her clarity and composure. One of them directed her to a legal advisor affiliated with the women's advocacy group Parveen had mentioned. A meeting was arranged. Forms were filed. She was told that if she could provide 1 or 2 witnesses from her past workplace who could confirm her mental competency, they could pursue charges and financial restitution. She smiled faintly. "I may be old," she said, "but I'm not broken. I know what happened to me." Over the next few weeks, she returned to the house with silence, but it was no longer helpless. It was strategic. She collected more papers, recorded short voice memos of conversations when Amina and Rashid discussed finances, and hid them safely. Her time there had a deadline now, but not because they were kicking her out, because she was preparing to walk out on her own terms. The final straw came on a cold Friday evening. Amina barged into the lounge, furious about a misplaced bill. "You forgot to give Rashid the water bill. Do you do anything useful anymore?" she shouted. The mother looked up slowly. There was no fear, no flinch. "I did," she said softly. "It's in the drawer." Amina paused. "Well, next time, inform me. You're not the owner of this house." "No," the mother replied. But I used to be. Asterisk Amina stormed off, annoyed, while the mother returned to her corner, but her heart was beating faster than ever. It was almost time. Asterisk later that night, she stared at the ceiling once again. The fan spun slowly. The house was quiet, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what the silence meant. She was ready. She had nothing but an old purse, a bruised heart, and the fire of a woman who had lost everything but found her strength again. Asterisk, and sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. Asterisk, the following week began like all the others, but the air inside the house carried a shift, a current of quiet tension that only the mother could sense. She had lived in silence long enough to detect the tremors before the earthquake. Amina's voice had grown sharper in tone, her movements more rushed, and her eyes were always scanning like someone who suspected a storm was coming but didn't yet know its direction. Something in the mother's stillness unsettled her. She had mistaken compliance for defeat, but something had changed, and her instincts were whispering warnings she couldn't yet name. Asterisk, the mother didn't do anything unusual that morning. She folded the laundry, brewed the tea, swept the hallway, and sat in the sun by the small window for a few moments. But what no one saw was what lay inside her worn-out purse. That old leather pouch had become her lifeline, her container of truth, tucked carefully inside with the forged documents, bank withdrawal slips, voice recordings on a tiny USB drive, and a small notepad where she had written every betrayal with dates, times, and details. It had taken her weeks to gather everything, each piece a thread. Now she had a web. Asterisk, at noon, she quietly slipped out. She said nothing to anyone. It was a bright afternoon, but the wind was crisp. She wore her beige shawl pulled tight around her shoulders and walked slowly, her cane tapping gently against the footpath. At the bus stop, she waited beside two strangers. To them, she was just another elderly woman heading somewhere unimportant, but her heart was pounding like a war drum. She wasn't running away. She was marching into battle. Asterisk, she arrived at the legal aid center a few blocks from the pension office. Parveen was already waiting for her inside, along with a junior advocate named Marak, a woman in her 30s, with intelligent eyes and a calm voice. They sat in a small consultation room, while the mother slowly unpacked the contents of her purse. Asterisk, she laid each piece on the table one by one, narrating the story, as she did how her daughter had convinced her to sign over financial authority, how her pension disappeared month after month, how she had been reduced to sleeping on the floor in her own child's home. Marak listened quietly, taking notes, pausing only to ask specific questions. Asterisk, this is not just elder neglect, Marak finally said. This is financial abuse, criminal forgery, and emotional exploitation. We can file for emergency protection, initiate investigation into financial misconduct, and pursue restoration of property rights. Asterisk, the mother didn't ask what would happen to Amina. She didn't ask about the consequences or outcomes. Her voice was clear. I don't want revenge. I want my name back. I want my life back. Asterisk, legal documents were prepared. Statements were signed. Copies of everything were stored digitally and backed up. An appointment was set with the pension board's inquiry committee. Marak assured her that they would proceed carefully, but firmly. You won't be alone in this, she said, but you must prepare to leave that house soon. It's not safe for you anymore. Asterisk, the mother nodded. She had already made peace with that. Asterisk, that night, she returned home to find Amina pacing in the kitchen. Where were you? She snapped out. The mother replied calmly. You should have told me. You can't just leave like this. This is not a hotel. Asterisk, the mother looked her in the eye. I was under the impression it wasn't a prison either. Asterisk, Amina froze for a second before scoffing. Getting bold now, aren't you? Asterisk, I'm getting tired, the mother whispered, of being erased. Asterisk, she walked to her corner of the lounge and sat down on the floor, as she always did, but tonight, her back remained straight, her eyes didn't look down. Asterisk, the next day, a letter arrived. Amina picked it up from the mailbox and read the seal. Her face paled slightly. It was addressed to her mother, from the pension board. Inside, it stated that due to a formal complaint and active investigation, all pension transfers would be temporarily frozen pending verification. Any future financial activity would require the mother's direct authorization. Asterisk, Amina stormed into the lounge. What the hell is this? She yelled, waving the letter in her hand. Asterisk, the mother didn't even blink. It's justice. Late, but here. Asterisk, you're accusing your own daughter. After everything I've done for you, Amina's voice cracked. You live here, you eat here. Asterisk, I used to live here, the mother replied, but I stopped living the day you turned my presence into a burden. I used to eat here, yes, but always last, always quietly, always like I didn't deserve it. That's not love, that's survival. Asterisk, Rashid entered the room. You're creating problems, he said. We didn't do anything wrong. Asterisk, the mother held up the document from her purse, the forged property transfer. Then why did you forge my signature? Asterisk, there was silence. Cold, sharp, cutting silence. Asterisk, later that evening, after they had gone into their room to argue behind closed doors, the mother slowly packed her things, not much, just her clothes, a few old photographs, her husband's prayer cap, and the purse that had become her armor. She didn't expect anyone to stop her, and no one did. The next morning, she left. She didn't look back. Asterisk, she checked into the temporary shelter arranged by the legal aid group. It was a clean, safe place with other women who had similar stories written across their faces. In that shared pain, she found a strange comfort. She wasn't alone anymore. Her silence had broken, and so had the illusion that she was powerless. Asterisk, days turned into a week. Legal proceedings began. Her statements were recorded. A hearing was scheduled. The pension board confirmed several unauthorized transactions and would begin restitution. Her daughter's access was revoked entirely. As for the property, the case was moving through its early stages, but there was hope. Marak said it could take months, maybe more, but there was a real chance she could reclaim her share. Asterisk, but even if she didn't, she had won something greater. She had her dignity. One morning, while sipping tea on the bench outside the shelter, she received a call from Amina. The screen flashed for a moment. She stared at it, then let it ring out. There were no words she wanted to hear now. No apologies that could undo what had been done. Asterisk, later that day, she received a message. Asterisk, I don't understand why you're doing this. You could have just stayed quiet and lived peacefully. You've humiliated me. Was that your goal? Asterisk, she read it twice, then typed a single sentence in reply. Asterisk, I stayed quiet for too long. Peace doesn't live in silence, it lives in truth. Asterisk, she turned off the phone and placed it in her drawer. For the first time in months, she went to bed in a proper bed, beneath a soft blanket, with her own pillow. She looked at the ceiling and let her body rest, not in fear, not in pain, but in peace. And she dreamed, not of the past, but of what came next. Asterisk, in the weeks that followed her departure, life took on a quiet rhythm of healing. The mother adjusted slowly to her new surroundings at the shelter. Though it lacked the familiarity of her old home, the comforting smell of her husband's books, the soft tick of the wall clock, the balcony where she once sat with morning tea, offered something far more precious. Respect. Asterisk, here. No one shouted at her. No one told her where to sit, when to sleep, or what she was allowed to eat. There were other women too, some younger, some older, all with stories that echoed hers in fragments. Daughters who vanished after marriage, sons who stopped answering calls, families who treated them like burdens once their usefulness expired. They didn't speak about it all the time, but the understanding was always there, lingering in the quiet conversations over shared meals or evening prayers. For the first time in years, she felt seen, not judged, not used. Asterisk, each morning, she walked in the small garden behind the shelter. She would breathe in the sharp morning air and think not of the betrayals, but of the resilience it took to survive them. The worst had already happened. What lay ahead was hers to shape. She had left behind a life of silence, and now every choice she made, no matter how small, was an act of reclaiming herself. Asterisk. One of the shelter workers introduced her to a woman named Farah, who volunteered at a nearby community center. Farah, impressed by her sharp memory and calm demeanor, offered her a chance to help teach basic literacy classes to older women. You don't need to be perfect, just patient, Farah said. The idea stirred something in her old joy. She had spent her life as a teacher, molding futures, instilling confidence. Perhaps she could do that again, not in a classroom, but in this new chapter of her life. Asterisk, on the first day of teaching, she stood before a group of 6 women, most older than herself. They were timid, hesitant, apologetic for not knowing how to read or write. She looked at them with warmth and said, "You're not late, you're just beginning at your own time." The room filled with cautious smiles. That day, as she taught them how to write their own names for the first time, She felt a kind of peace that no amount of money or comfort could bring. Meanwhile, the legal case moved forward. Her lawyer, Marak, kept her updated on the developments. The forged signature on the property documents had been verified by handwriting experts. The bank confirmed that her pension account had been accessed by someone else. It was all taking shape, a slow march toward justice. She didn't ask how long it would take. Time didn't scare her anymore. What mattered was that someone, somewhere, had finally started listening. The shelter staff arranged for her to visit a doctor. She was diagnosed with mild arthritis and early signs of hypertension. Nothing unmanageable, but it made her realize how much neglect she had normalized when living with Amina. "You'll be fine with some medication and exercise," the doctor said kindly. She thanked him, holding back tears. It wasn't the diagnosis that moved her, it was the fact that someone cared enough to look. One afternoon, she received a call from an unknown number. "Curious," she answered. It was Amina. Emmy. The voice cracked on the other end. She didn't say anything. I don't know what to say. Everything is falling apart. Rashid left. He said he doesn't want to be dragged into this. The house might go into litigation. I didn't think you'd go this far. She waited. "Why didn't you just talk to me?" Amina asked, her voice now barely a whisper. I did, she replied calmly. "Many times. You just weren't listening." There was silence. Then a quiet sob. "Amy, I'm sorry." She closed her eyes. The words she had longed to hear for years had finally come, but they didn't carry the weight they once did. It was not hate she felt now, but a quiet detachment, like hearing a song that used to mean everything but now brought no emotion. She had already walked away from that version of her life. "I forgive you," she said softly, "but I won't return." "Where will you go?" "You're old." "I'm not afraid of being old," she interrupted. "I'm only afraid of being unloved in a house I built with love." The line went silent. She ended the call. That evening, she sat in the garden under the open sky, looking at the stars. She thought of her husband and how he would have reacted to all of this. He had always been gentle, the kind of man who brought home books instead of gifts, who believed in dignity more than comfort. "If ever the world turns cruel," he once told her, "don't lose your softness. It's the strongest part of you." She smiled, remembering his words. She hadn't lost it. She had just hidden it away until it was safe again. A few days later, the community center offered her a honorarium for her teaching. It wasn't much, but it made her feel independent again. She used the money to buy a new pair of sandals, a good shawl, and a small notebook where she began writing her experiences, not just to vent, but to document, to inspire. She knew there were thousands of women like her, who had lived silent lives, forgotten by those they once carried in their arms. If her story could help even one of them find their voice, it would be worth telling. Word began to spread about her classes. More women came. Some brought flowers. One brought a homemade meal. She never expected gratitude, but she welcomed it with humility. Her hands, once used only for serving ungrateful family members, were now holding pens with others, guiding trembling fingers across blank pages. The shelter, though temporary, began to feel like a sanctuary. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't her old home, but it was a place of healing, and that made it sacred. She started taking care of the small plants in the garden. She watered them every morning, speaking to them softly like children. "Grow slowly," she would say, "but grow strong." One day, as she taught her class, one of the women asked, "How did you survive everything?" She paused, looked at the woman, and said, "I didn't survive because I was brave. I survived because I refused to forget who I was." That night, she wrote in her new notebook, "Strength is not loud. Sometimes, it's just getting out of bed after being told you don't matter. Sometimes, it's forgiving the ones who broke you but refusing to let them walk on you again. Sometimes, strength is simply starting over with nothing but your name." And that name. She had reclaimed it, not by shouting, but by rising, quietly, steadily. News travels fast in small communities, especially when it carries the weight of justice. It began with someone at the pension office, mentioning a woman who had taken legal action against her own daughter. Then came the full story, an elderly woman forced to sleep on the floor, her pension stolen, her dignity trampled, and yet, she fought back silently, intelligently, and fearlessly. Word reached former colleagues, students, and even old neighbors who had long assumed she was living comfortably with her family. One such person was Mrs. Shabana, a retired principal from the school where the mother had taught for over 20 years. She hadn't seen her in nearly a decade, but still remembered her calm nature, her unwavering integrity. When she heard the story, she contacted the community center where the mother now volunteered. A visit was arranged. When Shabana entered the modest garden behind the shelter, she gasped softly. The woman before her, wearing a pale blue shawl and a warm smile, was aged, yes, but her eyes still held the same light of intelligence and grace. The mother stood up from the bench slowly, surprised, and then smiled. They embraced, two women who had seen the best and worst of life, now meeting again, not in a school corridor, but on the battlefield of survival. You still carry that same calmness, Shabana said. And you still walk like you're heading to a classroom. The mother replied, they laughed quietly, but behind the laughter was a deep sorrow shared between them, one for the times, the changes, and the betrayals that come from the people closest to us. Over tea, the mother shared her journey, not dramatically, not with tears, but like a narrator who had made peace with her story. Shabana listened, deeply moved. I think we need to do something more permanent for you, she said. You can't live in a shelter forever. I don't plan to, the mother responded, but I don't plan to return to any place where I'm not respected either. Over the next few days, Shabana made arrangements with a charitable trust that offered housing assistance to retired teachers who had fallen on hard times. The organization offered the mother a small one-bedroom unit in a peaceful area on the outskirts of the city, near a library and a clinic. It wasn't luxury, but it was freedom. It was home. On the day she moved in, she stood in the empty room, looking at the bare walls and the single window that let in soft light. She placed her husband's prayer cap on the shelf near the bed and whispered, "We made it." Her hands ran across the surface of the window pane, as if greeting it. It was the first home she could call her own, without fear of being silenced, discarded, or insulted. The first night there was quiet in a different way. No footsteps in the hall, no slamming doors, no whispered threats, just the sound of wind in the trees outside and the occasional rustling of leaves. She didn't feel lonely, she felt held by the silence, as if the universe itself was tucking her in, saying, "Rest now, you've earned it." Meanwhile, the legal proceedings reached a turning point. Marak informed her that the investigation was complete. The property documents had been proven forged. The pension board had formally restored full control of her account to her, and restitution payments were being arranged. While criminal charges against Amina were possible, the mother requested that they stop short of jail time. "Let her live with what she did," she said. "That will be heavier than any sentence." When this decision was shared with Amina's lawyer, the daughter didn't respond. But a few days later, a letter arrived at the community center. It was written in shaky handwriting. Amina's, It was a long letter filled with guilt, regret, attempts to justify, and finally, apology. I don't expect you to forgive me, it read. I just want you to know, I never imagined you'd walk away. You always stayed, no matter what life threw at you. I guess I thought you'd stay through this too. The mother read it once, then again, then folded it and placed it in a small box of things she no longer needed. Dulled pain, past sorrow, broken promises. She wasn't angry anymore, but she wasn't going to return to a place where love was conditional, where apologies only came when comfort was lost. One morning, she stood outside her new home, watching the sunrise. The sky stretched into soft pastels of pink and gold, the kind of colors that made you believe in new beginnings. A young girl from the neighboring flat came over with a bowl of fruit. "My nanny said you were a teacher. She wants to meet you," she said shyly. The mother smiled. "Tell your nanny, I'd love to." Soon, she found herself helping a few neighborhood children with reading. They would come in pairs, sit on floor cushions, and listen to her soft, patient voice, guiding them through letters and stories. One child brought her a hand-drawn card with the words, "You are very nice and kind. Thank you for teaching me." She pinned it to her wall. Her small home slowly began to reflect her essence. A teacup with roses on it, a soft green curtain, a shelf of borrowed books, and always, her notebook now filled not with details of betrayal, but pages of poetry, memories of quiet strength. and messages to women like her. Asterisk to the woman who thinks she is too old to start over, know this. Your age is not a full stop, it is a comma. Your story isn't finished yet. Asterisk she was invited to speak at a local event on elder abuse awareness. Nervous at first, she stood before a room full of strangers and told her story not for sympathy, but to illuminate. She spoke with calm, clarity, and quiet power. When she finished, the audience stood in silence. Then, applause, tears, hugs. One woman whispered, "You gave me courage," and that was all she wanted. She no longer saw herself as a victim. She was a survivor. Yes, but more than that, she was a teacher still. Always teaching the world what it meant to rise after being cast down, to reclaim dignity after being robbed of it, to choose love for oneself, even when others have withheld it. Asterisk she wrote one final note in her old notebook before she placed it in her trunk. Asterisk, the return of the forgotten queen is not about revenge. It is about reclaiming her throne, her peace, her name, her worth, not with fury, but with grace. Asterisk, she closed the book gently and looked out the window at the setting sun. It wasn't the end. It was simply a continuation, a life rebuilt, a throne reclaimed. On her terms, the morning sunlight entered her modest home gently, as though it, too, understood the sanctity of silence. It danced on the curtain folds, warmed the tiled floor, and lingered near the small wooden shelf where she had placed her husband's photo, a cup of tea, and a single marigold. The air carried no noise from slamming doors or tense footsteps, just the distant chirp of birds and the calm rustle of trees outside. For the first time in years, the start of a new day felt like a blessing, not a battle. Asterisk she sat on her veranda, sipping her tea slowly, watching the world pass with the patience of someone who had learned to embrace time rather than chase it. Every sip reminded her of all the mornings she had served tea to people who never paused to thank her. Now, there was no one to serve, but she didn't feel lonely. She felt full of quiet dignity, of memories that no longer hurt, and of a peace she had earned with the currency of suffering. Asterisk the small garden she had planted in the yard was beginning to bloom. Tiny buds of jasmine and tulips poked their heads through the soil, stubborn against the odds, just like her. Each plant had a name in her mind. One was hope, another courage, and the tallest one by the wall, freedom. Every morning, she spoke to them as if they were children, watering them, not just with water, but with grace. Asterisk the community had begun to know her not just as that woman who left her daughter's home, but as someone with wisdom and quiet strength. Neighbors dropped by occasionally, sometimes with food, sometimes just to sit and listen. The children called her Bari Emmy with affection. They didn't know her story in full, but they saw something in her presence, something soft, yet unshakable. She never spoke ill of Amina or Rashid. Not because she had forgotten, but because she had chosen to move beyond. Asterisk there came a day, weeks after she had settled into her new life, when she received a formal notice from the court. The property case was resolved. The house she had partly funded, the house where her name was silently scrubbed from the documents, was now lawfully reinstated with her half-ownership. Amina would no longer be able to sell it without her approval. Her pension, too, had been fully recovered. The financial abuse case had concluded with formal restitution, and her dignity, though intangible, had been acknowledged in a way that mattered. Asterisk when her lawyer called to ask if she wanted to visit the house again or claim her physical space back, she declined. She didn't need bricks to prove her worth. She had already reclaimed something far more powerful, her agency. Let the house remain a building. She had a home now, a sacred, earned space. Asterisk still, her story had not ended with legal victories. That was only part of it. The larger victory was internal. It was the reclamation of her voice, her choices, and her narrative. For years, her life had been written by others, by her role as a mother, by societal expectations, by the ungrateful hands that once held hers only to snatch away what was hers. Now, she was the author. She decided to write her story, not for fame, not for revenge, but for remembrance. Asterisk she began journaling daily, an honest, reflective collection of her experiences. She called it The Floor and the Throne. It was her way of documenting the journey from being stepped over to standing tall. She wrote about the nights on the floor, the moments of invisible heartbreak, the way betrayal crept into the small spaces of everyday life, but she also wrote about the strength that surfaced in silence, about the women in the shelter who carried their wounds with dignity. and about how courage often comes dressed in quiet resolve rather than loud declarations. She submitted the manuscript to a small local publishing house, expecting little, but within weeks, a woman named Alina, an editor in her 30s, called her personally. "I cried while reading it," she confessed. "Your story is what so many women need to read, not just those who've been hurt, but those who've forgotten how strong they are." The book was published in a simple format. No dramatic launches, no media frenzy, just stacks of quiet pages carrying her voice. The first print sold out in less than a month. Libraries requested copies. Shelters asked for bulk orders. A few newspapers wrote small features. "The 67-year-old woman who taught us how to rise." One evening, she was invited to speak at a university seminar on women's rights and elder justice. Dressed in her simple white cotton dress and her favorite shawl, she stepped onto the stage, greeted by respectful applause. She stood in front of the mic and paused. "I am not here because I am brave," she said. "I am here because I was broken and I chose to repair myself." She spoke of pain, but more importantly, of reclaiming, of how women, especially mothers, are often expected to endure silently, of how love is never meant to be bought with sacrifice, of how survival isn't just about breathing, but about refusing to live in someone else's shadow. When she finished, the hall stood still, before erupting in applause. Some students wept openly. One young girl approached her and whispered, "I'm going to talk to my grandmother today. I haven't in months. Thank you." As she returned to her home that night, she didn't feel tired. Her steps were slow, but her heart was light. She sat in her veranda and looked up at the sky, now streaked with the soft colors of dusk. She wasn't angry at her daughter anymore. She had moved past that stage, but she wasn't going to forget. She believed in remembering, not as a chain, but as a compass. She wished Amina well, but from a distance. Sometimes love meant walking away and letting someone feel the weight of your absence. As weeks rolled on, she continued teaching neighborhood children, writing articles, and mentoring younger women. Her small home became a sanctuary not just for herself, but for others seeking quiet strength. She hung a hand-painted sign on her front door that read, "You are not too old. You are not too late." In time, she began receiving letters not from lawyers or institutions, but from strangers, women from different parts of the country who had read her book, seen her speech, or heard her story through word of mouth. They shared their pain, their betrayal, their silence. Some asked for advice. Others simply thanked her for making them feel seen. She replied to every letter, always with kindness, always with hope. On her 68th birthday, her small garden bloomed in full. The jasmine vines kissed the walls, and the tulips stood tall in a quiet display of defiance against the odds. Neighbors gathered, bringing home-cooked dishes and small gifts. The children sang for her. There were no grand decorations, no elaborate cakes, but it was the most heartfelt celebration she had ever received. As the sun began to set that evening, she sat in the middle of her garden, surrounded by people who respected her not for what she had endured, but for how she had risen. She looked around at the laughter, the warmth, and the light. She thought of the floor where she once lay in silence. Then she looked at her chair, placed at the center, and smiled. This was her throne now, and she had placed it here with her own hands.